Okay, thank you very much for everybody for coming. This is the second of our gallery talk series. Nice to see so many of you here yet again. It warms the little cockles of my heart to see so many people here. What else do I need to say about this? Welcome, yes. I'm Benjamin Evans. I'm the news director here. I don't know if I always forget to mention that, so I have to mention that. The goal of these talks was originally to just give people an opportunity for the general public, as well as sort of the student Alfred people, to meet all of the artists that are still around of this amazing exhibition, and maybe to give a little bit of reflection on what it has meant or continues to mean to be in Alfred and in this space and a part of this whole history and so on and so forth. Of course, artists being who they are, that's not necessarily what they're going to talk about, and that's just fine. They're going to talk about whatever the heck they like. And the idea is that it's a fairly casual encounter. You are all encouraged to participate. Sort of the idea is that there will be 20 minutes per person, and then 20 minutes of question and answer and dialogue and exchange, and whatever the heck happens is just fine. If it goes longer than that, that's just fine as well, but the idea is to keep it sort of short, sharp, and sweet, if I can just shut up. For both of you, I will give you some kind of a little indication, just to let you, I'll go like that, just to let you know that 20 minutes has gone by, but I'm not trying to shush you, I'm not trying to advance things, and just to let you know how much time has gone by. That's all I'm doing. So if you see me do that, that's what I'm doing. So today, this afternoon, we have Wayne Higby, who probably needs fairly little introduction, as he was the director here for a long, long time, and Anne Currier, who had a career here for a nice long time. I'm not going to give a long introduction. So, and I think we're going to start with Wayne. That's what's been agreed. So, take it away, Wayne.
Okay, thank you. I think Anne and I chatted about this. We had this idea that there would be some sense if I went first, then because I was here before Anne arrived. So it's age before beauty or something, I don't know. But I was here. I was here at the school before Anne arrived. I met Anne in 1977 when I was a visiting artist in Boulder and she was teaching there. And so we've known each other for 48 years. And probably I've known John and Andrea a little longer. Walter was a grad student here, and Jason Green was. So I have a history with any number of folks who on the faculty over that period of time. In 1973, that's the year that I showed up in Alfred here as an associate professor in the ceramic art program. And I had an exhibition, I think it was 73 earlier, or it may have been 72. I had an exhibition at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, a one-person exhibition. That's not the name of the museum now. It was called the Museum of American Craft at the time I had my exhibition. And I was invited by the director to have this exhibition. At the time I was teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design and making work, and the director caught wind of that and had seen some pieces, and I had this invitation. So once the show opened, the next thing that happened for me was that a gentleman named Ted Randall, who was head of the art school at the time, called me on the phone. And he said, would you be willing to come to Alfred and talk to us about a position that we have open? And why wouldn't I do that? Of course. Okay, sure, absolutely, no question. So I came and I had a lovely interview with Val and Ted Randall and Robert Turner, of course, was here. And several weeks later, Ted called me again and said, would you be willing to accept the job? And I said, give me a moment. Let me talk this over with my wife. At the time, my wife passed in 2004, but she was my chief counselor. Her name was Donna, and someone that I had met when I was 15 years old in high school. And it was kismet, and she became a painter, has an MFA in painting. But she was kind of the chief critic and the chief major decision maker in my life. So it wasn't something that I could do without her enthusiastic approval. So she says, well, why don't we go up there and then I can see the scene. And I said, okay. So I told Ted that I would have to think about it, but my wife was very important to the decision making, and she hadn't come on the first interview. So that's a little bit of that kind of backstory. One other very interesting thing happened around that time. Earlier in '73, I was part of an exhibition that actually was in Geneseo, at the school in Geneseo. It was called a Raku exhibition of Raku ceramics or something. And so there was, I do that because Raku is a kind of complex word, and we can talk about that later, having to do with my work. But in any case, there was a party after the opening, and it happened to be in Rochester at Franz Wildenhain's house, at his home. I had never met Franz Wildenhain, but Franz Wildenhain was head of ceramics at RAT during that period. And he was an immigrant from Germany. He and his wife, Marguerite, had come to this country when the Bauhaus had shut down. And we can talk a little bit more about the Bauhaus for those of you who are just beginning to become familiar with some of that. But his history was fascinating, and he was very well respected ceramic artist. So in any case, we were having drinks and whatever you do at these kind of parties. And finally, he walked up to me, and he was quite a towering gentleman, taller than me. I'm not that tall. He was at least 6 something. And he looked kind of down at me, and he says, oh, you're Wayne Higby. You're the young man who's going to Alfred. In the next breath, he said, don't you know that place is dead? And I went, I didn't have a comeback, you know? So I just sort of, well, maybe we have to do something about that. So it was very interesting because it bothered me, obviously. I didn't know what he was meaning, and it was a party, and I didn't have a chance to take him to the other room and ask him to explain what he meant. And I don't know whether he was trying to intimidate me or trying to ask me a question or make a statement about Alfred. I wasn't sure. But he was a major player in American ceramics, and I listened to him, and I kept thinking about it. And you know, it's always context. So, you know, in retrospect, what it's important maybe to understand for all of us here sitting now in this space is that the Americans lost the Vietnam War. And in 1973, we had just left South Vietnam. If you remember the time, as I do, there were helicopters and people trying to escape, and the war had collapsed, and we were out. This was earth-shaking for America. America had never lost a war. You know, we rescued Europe in World War I, so to speak. We did so again in World War II. We were owning the world as Americans. And to lose this war in Vietnam was earth-shaking. What did that do? It completely deconstructed the idea of institutions in America. So Alfred, if we follow the dots I'm kind of suggesting, Alfred was an institution. It was a university. It was the school where ceramics was in academia. This was where you went to study ceramics. This is the place that Charles Ferguson Binns founded. And now, wait a minute, we have no faith in institutions anymore. Institutions are up for critique. So I think maybe, I don't know that that's what Franz was telling me, because he maybe hadn't even thought it through, but he was telling me something about the times and the situation that I was about to enter as somebody, some wannabe person who took a job in an institution of higher learning, all of which was suspect at that point in our history in America. So what's the point of that story? A couple of things. One thing is, it's reasonable and perhaps quite important for us to understand the times in which we are living, the times, what are the dynamics of now? What were the dynamics of then? Why would someone that revered in the art world say that to me? And how did I understand it? How could I put those parts of the puzzle together and understand it? Bob Turner was a conscientious objector. And so he was here. Val was in the Army, not in the Vietnam War, but he was in the Army earlier in World War II, not in the field, not in the Pacific or the European theater, but he was here, and so many other men were also within that frame. A lot of things happened at the end of World War II after the kind of American dominance and takeover in Japan, and a lot of people came back on the GI Bill, and they were interested in Asian aesthetics and Asian ceramics, et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots of little links, and what I'm trying to say is how I had to figure out, why did this man say this to me? And was it a joke? Was I just being offensive? Or was there some kernel of truth? Why did he think that? And so I'm sharing it at the moment. So moving on, I walked in 1973, and the first thing, of course, is I have a faculty meeting with who? Ted Randall, Robert Turner, Val Cushing, and me. And I'm going, I am definitely out of my league here. I don't know who I am, what I'm doing. Yeah, I had a show at an important museum in New York because my work was a little different. I knew that much. But these men were men that I had read about, who I knew about, and they were looking at me like, so what should we do? And things evolved from then, but I'd never met a group of people with that kind of stature who were as supportive as they were. They were very gifted gentlemen, and they were very generous gentlemen. And they wanted me to try and reinvent things, Vietnam War, institutions are collapsing, there's a lot of suspicion. What can we do? As if I had an answer to that, which I didn't. But also, I arrived, I thought of myself as an artist who worked in clay, not a ceramic artist. I was just an artist. My father was a lawyer. I'm an artist, he's a lawyer. It was just a job in my head. So I went to art school. I was an undergraduate student in an art school, taking art classes in Boulder at the University of Colorado. My father didn't want me necessarily to be an artist, but finally he didn't have much choice. So I just walked in the door saying, I'm an artist, I happen to work in ceramics. That was maybe telling, because I asked this audience maybe last week, and maybe, I don't know how many of you were here the last time we got together with John and Matt. Were most of you here? You may remember that I did finally ask a question. And my question was, what's the problem of ceramics? And then I didn't actually know why I asked that question. But I asked it thinking, we're talking about John was great. There's no problem. I just make stuff that's so wonderful. It's always great. And he's absolutely right. It always is great. But I would, at some point you can ask me later, because I don't want to take up too much time, but I would frame that question not in relationship to technique or processes and things of that nature, but I would put a frame around it in terms of 3 words: art, craft, and design. Art, craft, and design. Ceramics sits at this juncture between art, craft, and design. And nobody knows what that means. We don't talk about it. We don't ask ourselves questions. Is there a difference between the artist and the craftsman and the designer, and what roles do they play? But craft and ceramics and design and art are this amalgamation that has its roots in a problem of ceramics, because it's hard to unpack all of those particular relationships and to delve into a critical analysis of those different relationships and how they flow together within ceramics. So I think that's what the problem is, because most of the time there is no cogent conversation around those 3 things. And we don't kind of go there. There was a show in, just as an illustration, looking over at John, there was a show that the Met put on in 2021. It's called The Shapes from Out of Nowhere. This was the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. They're having a major ceramic exhibition. John was on the cover of the catalog, one of his pieces, rightfully so. And shapes from out of nowhere, well, out of John's head, but of course they were from somewhere. There's a whole history of the vessel, and this whole history of sculpture, and this whole, all of these forms that you see in this catalog have some relationship to other forms that we would experience in the world of art making. But let's give the Met a little wiggle room. They want to bring in the audience, so make up a clever title. At the same time, ceramics has always been the victim of this clever title thing. We never get to it. So when you open the catalog, and Glenn Adamson writes about the vessel and the history of these things, and then he begins to do this, but at the same time, he's also playing along. So I just wanted to share that notion that the problem with ceramics is those 3 words and how we use them, how we work with them, and how we understand them. I think probably today, and I certainly would say in terms of my own work, it's all 3 of those things. But I know which is which. I have a theoretical premise in my head about which is which and how to turn one on and turn one off and turn the other one on, and to look at my work and tell you something about how it's those three things. Years ago, I was making these landscape boxes, a set of boxes, and I don't know what it was, but some show I was in, and someone wrote a critique about the work in the show, and they picked on me a little bit, and they asked this question: is Wayne Higby a painter, or a sculptor, or a potter? And I thought to myself, all of them. Do I have to decide? No. Of course, you could see how it's very painterly. Look at the bowl down at the other end of the room. You can see that it's a bowl. Oh, excuse me, that must be pottery, or some relationship to something about pottery. And then in this case with the cover jars, you would get it because you had to take the lid off, and when you took the top off, there was an empty space in there. I always loved the empty space. Like, wow, what's in there? Don't we all do that to work in ceramics? Look in there. But it was also these boxes. So it was, to the mind of the reviewer, it was sculpture. It was in 3 dimensions. I never thought we had, I was under any obligation to separate those things out, but that I was interested in those things. And I was interested in things made by hand, craft. I was interested in design, solving problems. Earth Cloud is a good example up here on campus. It starts with an architectural space, and that's the problem. What are you going to do there? That designer plans something, and then the artist has to intervene and say, well, let's do this. So anyway, I'm getting the watch, and Ben, thank you. But if you want to ask a little bit later anything about the technical side of the work, I'm happy to answer those things. I would like to talk more about context in relation to Binns and where he came from in the arts and crafts movement in England and after the Industrial Revolution, and the idea of social ills within industry. We could segue that arts and crafts thing to AI, which is in the moment. There's some things to learn from arts and crafts. His work is also has an echo of Chinese in it. The arts and crafts world loved the Chinese ceramics, which they began seeing way back in the 14th century. But particularly in arts and crafts, they loved them because it was all made by hand. And industry in China at that time was it was just hand making. So there's a bunch of things to talk about like that, and if you would just think about a few of those things and then ask me some questions afterwards, and let Anne have the floor.
Okay. Well, in contemplating my 20 minutes and what I was gonna speak about or two, I came up with this notion of the evolution of a notion, the evolution of the imagination. And I'm not using the word idea because idea can kind of does go into many different places, conceptual or basic, or maybe it's something simpler like, I just have a notion. And thinking that you all are here because at some point, Ann Currier was asked by the ceramic art faculty at Alfred in 1984 to apply for a position that I thought they just need more women in the pool. John and Andrea were also being considered. We were all living in Colorado at the time, and we would get together and go, are you gonna apply for that job? I don't know, we had tenure. We loved Colorado. But we came here. And first and foremost, it was a risk. It was one of the biggest risks I ever took. And I took it because I had to tell myself, can you do this? But I also have a husband, a fantastic man in my life, who had to be happy and be agreeable to also coming here. So we did. All right, so to go back to this evolution of a notion or idea, I don't want to talk about necessarily me, but I want to address the work, because I think the work is the subject matter. It was, it's not that I'm not interested in anecdotes, but it's the evolution of this, which is part of that notion. And so just to give a few anecdotal or personal comments, I was born in 1950 in Louisville, Kentucky, so if you detect a Southern accent from time to time, that has not left me. And in 1968, I went to the Art Institute of Chicago. Wayne mentioned Vietnam. Half the time, my teachers weren't even there because the school gave them permission to go protest. And that's okay. We went to class, and I graduated. My mom looked at me years later. She says, I don't know how you made it through that. But we did. Then I went to the University of Washington in Seattle, where I had the great fortune to get to know, become friends with Patty Warashina. And, I think about what did I learn from Patty? Get a job, you guys, get a job. Enter shows. It's this thing about putting yourself out professionally. And what I really learned from her is that she would sit there, being that's Vietnam, this is post-Vietnam, she's in her studio working, doing this series of fish plates, which I think the museum has one, and she's watching Watergate. So she represented this, like where she was professionally with a family and drinking her gin and tonics and all that, going out. I wanted to be where she was. So how do you do that? And you work really hard. It's a job. Going into the studio is a job. And it takes a lot of discipline. But what gets me in there? It's this imagination. I'm going to go back for a second to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. When I got there, I think I must have been late in registering as a freshman, and I sit down with my advisor, and I went there thinking I was going to be an artist. I was an artist. I'm an artist and a maker. I love making pies, love making cakes. My mom said, all my other kids will blow up and get angry and sulk, and you always come in and you make a pie. That's what I did. And it's documented. We have photographs of me rolling out the dough, which probably was the harbinger of rolling out those initial slabs. But I digress. So my advisor says, well, as a freshman, you have to take 2D, 3D, art history, drawing. Does this sound familiar? Oh, I am going to digress. We have in our presence today a couple of artists that I recognize. But I want to point out Brian Oglesby, who's a photographer. He documents, photographs all the work for the museum. But Brian has an exhibition up right now at Houghton, right? And you're giving a talk tomorrow night. It's okay. I want you, there's not a lot to do in this community, right? There's an opening of a fantastic, internationally recognized photographer. Tomorrow night, what, 7 o'clock? 6? Okay. So you should be there. It'll be. Anyway, so as a freshman, art history, anyway, I listed those. But you got one elective. I want to be an artist. Painting. Well, all the painting classes for freshmen are full. I'm 17 years old. It's in Chicago. My parents left me on Michigan Avenue in front of the museum and drove back home. And now he's telling me there's no painting classes for freshmen. I'm thinking, what the heck am I going to do? I said, well, how about printmaking? I'm still thinking in that 2D place, right? No, they're all full too. The tears are starting. Oops. So what can I take? Well, you can take ceramics or weaving. Weaving. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I mean, I've worked with fiber, I knew both materials from high school and stuff. So it was a coin toss, and I took ceramics. So I right away was into Plan B. And I mention that because, we're throwing a lot of, there are a lot of detours. There are a lot of things where you do ceramics, you open the kiln. Oh shit, what's gonna happen? Ugh. This isn't what I wanted, but this is what I've been dealt. I still remember the time when the clay was centered and my whole body felt it. And I'm walking down Michigan Avenue, the Magnificent Mile, in front of all those high-end stores wearing my overalls with clay. You recognize, the clay that makes this horseshoe. So it was that feeling of, I wouldn't say conquering, but this relationship to skill and the body. And it was directed towards pots. And it was only later that I started to really see the wheel as a tool. And I really feel that because I learned to throw as not with an end product in mind, but just as part of a process of shape making, that actually put me on a track to making these pieces here. So that's why I want to talk. This is the biography. I'm going to be the biographer of this line of work. How did it evolve? Where did it come from? And it came from, oh shit, I can't do painting. I got to take ceramics. And in hindsight, it also strikes me that in 1968, that the two classes available to freshmen were the two in the craft media. They were left, so that says to me a lot, because I agree, I'm with Wayne. I came as an artist first and then found this material. And also what it gave me an opportunity to engage was three-dimension. And this relationship of the interior. When you think of throwing, those of you who know how to throw, what's really shaping it? I'm doing this, right? Because so much is initiated through the interior with a contraction and expansion, all right? So I'm digressing a little bit from the regular format of these. So those of you who are there, I know if you all want to come forward, because you're just hearing my voice.
There's also space back here.
There's space back here, so come on down. Just don't get in the way of the camera. Because I can't, this is so much better than a slide presentation. This is not PowerPoint. I get to point.
PowerPoint.
And do the Vanna White. This is 1973, by coincidence. That's 1990, sorry. 2008. I thought I had something in here, I don't, never mind. Ben's gonna pull it forward. This could be like a parking garage here.
I go right there, is that okay?
All right, excellent, thank you. 1973, and what you're not seeing is all that stuff that, your parents are gonna get it. And thanks to Andrea, she said, one day you'll get it back. And it's really good getting it back because you see the history. You see I remember you when you were a kid, but look at where you look now. You see from this infancy, where it's just a notion, and how it evolves. And if you went to Chris Staley's talk, he used the word transition. That's a great word. But I'm not, I guess maybe I'm transitioning into old age, but this came out of grad school. And it's like, I mentioned, all of this came off the wheel. Because I knew that tool and how to shape things. I knew that I could throw a half dome. I knew that I could throw this. So accessing this notion, because what I was evolving from was the utilitarian object into an object to function, to create a sense of place, a place setting. But it still had all the it still could be held, it still had intimacy involved. And in hindsight, this is doing the exact same thing as this. It's all there. You're shaking your head, you get it, right? I saw that once a couple years ago when I was packing up some work to send to Seattle for an exhibition about Patty Warshinen as a student. And I had one of these pieces, very similar with this interior, exterior, on my dining room wall. And I'm packing up one of these Art Deco cozy cup boxes. And I'm standing there and I'm looking, and it's like, holy shit, Currier. You're doing the same damn thing. You're dancing, you are still having this evolution of a notion that has to do with interior, exterior. You know, at the time, you can't really name it. And on that note, I do want to share with you. I like to read, but I read stuff, you all are told by your students in classes, things you have to read, you got to do it, faculty, whatever. But when I'm by myself and read what I want to read for pleasure, I really like mysteries, detective novels. And what really gets me about these detectives is who's the writer? Do they even know what the outcome is going to be? You know, how did they progress through that? You read mysteries too. So there's a book called Points and Lines. It's written by a Japanese author, Matsumoto, and it's based on a murder on a beach, and they have to figure out, points and lines have to do with the train system, you know, and the timing. And I've never been to Japan, but having been recently in Amsterdam, man, public transportation runs very precisely, right? So points and lines has to do with the transportation. But what Detective Torigai, I'm reading this thing, I want to find out what's going on, right? It's a mystery. But sometimes a preconceived opinion will make us overlook the obvious. This is a frightening thing. We call it common sense, but it often leaves us with a blind spot. Even if something appears to be obvious, one should investigate objectively to make absolutely sure. I've always loved that, so I just wanted to share it. You have to figure out how it comes into context with what I'm talking about. But I think it has to do with this evolution of a notion. It goes back to this piece. I remember, I'm now in Colorado. It's like 1976. And I know what my sources are with this work. Art Deco, primarily. And I'm looking at it, and I remember saying to myself, if you're going to keep doing this, you're in deep shit. You are really in trouble. Because I knew my sources, so I really had to take into account what was I making and what I was really interested in. And this is the container. You know, so I had to like fast forward the notion of containment. Very different than the container. Which then brings us, in a way, to this. But there's, in the 10 years of this is 1983. This was made 2 years before I came to Alfred. So this very well could have been some of the part of the portfolio that the pantheon of ceramic artists looked at. The early pieces of this were made with cylinders thrown on the wheel. And I always return to that, because those of us who have taught or teach, you're talking to you guys and you have these wonderful notions, ideas, like, that's really great. Can you make it? How are you going to make it? What are the tools that you have? And that's a really good process to go through, because maybe you decide, I need to bring other materials in. But if you're just in clay, how am I going to make it? All right. So this came, then I come to Alfred and this piece. And I know Ben has been interested, like, how did coming to Alfred affect? I kind of separate the experience. To me, the experience of coming to Alfred is that they're all art students here. It's an art program. And so there's a vocabulary, especially that you use as art students. When I was at CU Boulder, it was an art, I had guys coming basketball players who were taking it as an elective, economics majors who wanted, I had more students outside of the art program, as many students outside of the art program in my classes, which created a very interesting dynamic and conversation, because they didn't have access to the same lexicon that an art school has. And I kind of sometimes miss that, It was the diversity of, one of the guys came to me, I said, I want you to do make a vessel that's based on something personal in your life. And this guy comes back to me, he goes, what's a vessel? Which is kind of sad in some ways, but in a way, it's not part of that person's vocabulary. And I go, well, it's a container. Just make a container that had, and then he comes back to me the next class, he goes, Miss Currier, you lied to me? I said, what do you mean? He said, I asked my girlfriend what a vessel is, and she said it's a ship. I said, so make a ship. Anyway, I'm giving too many anecdotal things here. But I just thought that this was an opportunity, because you come here, what I really appreciate is you're all here. Because that throws into, for me, that you took time out of either, maybe your faculty says you gotta go. Or maybe you're here because you're curious. And curiosity, I think, is what has to keep us all going. John mentioned that story that Victor Babu had a fantastic imagination and told him a wonderful story based on that, this fantasy pot that, so anyway, so I have this fantasy about interiors. And the realization, what you're not seeing from here to here, what happened is before all this gets closed off, it came to this goes to my quote of realizing that my hand, unlike on the wheel, that my hand was always on the inside of this. I was always looking to the inside to weld the joints. And then I realized, why am I trying to manifest this when I'm always looking at this? So then I started thinking, can I turn this inside out? Doesn't that seem like a really simple question to ask? Can I turn this thing inside out? Well, that's an interesting observation, Currier. Now, how are you going to do it? And so there was one piece, actually the first one, it was all predicated on this, thinking about how can you make an object that has to do with mass that's predicated on the absence. So what's that relationship of absence and presence, which then I think follows it through with these pieces over here, So I've taken you from, I haven't gotten the wave just yet. I know. Well, he ran over a little bit.
You ran over.
This is why I want to go second. So you got 73. 63 or 73. Isn't this better than a slideshow? Are you ready? This was 2023. So the facilitator, the maker of these notions, went from this in 1973, which, by the way, there's another word, or two words, depending on how you spell it, place setting. It can be, where is the place? What is the set that holds, that frames the thing? So then you go to the hardware store. If you want this cup, you got to work at it. I think Howard Kotler came up with the name for these, cozy cups. If you want to take this apart and use it, feel free. So this was the place setting, the set, the contained moment, 1973, and 2023. This is made on the wheel. So I guess this is kind of a biography of a tool and a notion and an assistant, a fabricator. So I think I like it. All right, thank you.
Oh.
Where's my piece of paper?
Where's the cheat sheet?
I got to share one more quote with you because it is just so beautiful. Has anybody here ever read Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd? Oh my God. Well, first of all, you catch it on the PBS because the guy who plays Oak is just to die for. And but it was written in 1874 by Thomas Hardy. And it's basically a love story about a shepherd and a wealthy landowner, a woman. And he falls asleep by accident in his little shepherd's hut, and he forgets to open, you know about kilns and dampers, right? And he forgets to open the damper, so she notices all the smoke, and she pulls him out before he dies of asphyxiation. And he's laying on the ground coming to, and he realizes he's already in love with her. And he realizes there she is, and he's got his head on her lap. And he thinks to himself, he wished she knew his impressions, but he would as soon have thought of carrying an odor in a net as of attempting to convey his feelings in the coarse meshes of language. So he remained silent. Isn't that nice? Okay.
So we can just open it up to questions. Like you guys, I'll just correct if anybody, you don't notice somebody. So where do we want to start? Anybody got a question for either? Over there.
What did you mean by raku?
Well, raku, the reason I do that is because what you've experienced with my work is something called American raku. So there's something called raku, and there's a raku family in Japan. And the raku process, first time I ever read about it was in Leach's book, which was published in 1940. And he sort of did a raku firing that was also based on the Japanese notion. But in the Japan process, as I understood it, pieces were fired to temperature, then they were taken out and put it into a container that they were then cooled slowly. That was an annealing, if you're familiar with the word in glass. The idea of removing the object from the kiln when the glaze is molten and then putting it into a combustible material So it could be newspaper, it could be hay, it could be, I used straw. So what happens when you do that is that it means to ignite, and the combustible flames up. But if you close the container and tightly compact it with the combustible material, oxygen is taken out of the glaze instead of just out of the air. So when that happens, this oxygen factor is reduced, and patterns and phenomenology that we hadn't expected arise on the surface, depending on the glazes that you use. So this technique is called American raku, and it was invented in the early 20th century here. The raku that we associate with Japanese and the raku family is not done that way. There's no post-fire reduction process. So when I say raku, I mean American raku, that this notion of bringing it out of the kiln when the glazes are molten, and then putting the combustible and packing it so that the glaze shifts and the oxygen is drawn from the surface of the glaze. And pieces, if they're not glazed, they would be smoke, because smoke would be absorbed into the clay body, because generally the clay body is fairly porous. In order for this system to work, where it cools very rapidly and heats up very rapidly, the clay body has to be fairly porous. So my interest in raku was eventually something about light, because when I could manipulate the surface through this reduction process, I could get the feeling in my fantasy life. Fantasy, was that a word? Did you use that word? Imagination. That in that frame of imagination, I saw light passing across the landscape. Like it was cloudy on this side, and then it was sunny on this side. And I thought, oh, this is really great. I can manipulate qualities of light, or the phenomenology, or the illusion of light, by how I manipulate the glazes and use them. The other thing you'll find in my work, I think the bowl is a good example, but there is what John mentioned was water blue. That really wasn't my water blue, but it's a formula that's been available. It's an alkaline glaze. That blue glaze, and when you see it on that pot, it's pure oxidation. When you see the orange glaze, the other glaze on that pot, that's reduction. So what you see is a phenomenon in my work, which you won't see probably on anyone else's who did this process. Maybe today you would, but certainly not when I was at the height of working on this. You'll see a heavily reduced phenomenology and an oxidized phenomenology on the same object, which generally doesn't happen. So that's a process of calibrating the glaze. So in my studio, I'm working with this. I'm calibrating the glazes, and they melt at slightly different temperatures, and they harden at slightly different temperatures. So with the sort of signature glaze, which is that orange-green glaze, you see it on the pieces over there, that glaze sets. It freezes over after a very heavy reduction. It just sets. And the blue doesn't. So it would turn copper red because it has full of copper carbonate. But if I pick it up out of the sawdust or out of the hay or out of this reduction material and hold it in the air, what happens? The air is sucked into the surface, and the blue glaze becomes blue, not copper red. The reduction is cleared from the blue glaze. So that combination is just craft. You know what I'm saying? This is craft. This is made by hand, and it's figured out by a craftsman who is paying attention I used to say, craft is the art of paying attention, about materials and how you make things. And through the process of trial and error and watching, I invented that particular aspect of this raku process. But it's American raku. Thank you for the question. Great. You always ask good questions.
I have a question that I've had all week long for you.
For me?
Yeah, I've worked the whole week long on this question for you.
You're going to ask me that Tina Turner question? Like,
This is-
what would it be
this is a
like
long
if...
question that I've thought all week long on. In 1973, you and I entered the school at the same time, and there was a picture of you in the school journal where they were throwing pots up at John Wood's house, up in the air. It was a Steve Myers production. And there was a picture of you coming through the curtains, holding one of your jars, and you were totally sort of theatrical about it. Now, I've been in all kinds of situations with you across the world. So this is my question. How does theater come into your life? And did you write the script, or are you just an actor?
Who's the dancer?
Probably the actor. You know, what I'm interested in theater, I spent a lot of time as a young person. I would say teenager, but before that, I was very interested in dance. And at one point, I thought I was going to be a dancer. And so theater was interesting to me always. I did the choreography for the high school musical for 15 years. But theater, it's, what's the thing George used to always say about fly fishing? It's about presentation. How you throw your line out to, where the fish is and hook them. And maybe theater is a little bit of that. Teaching has a little bit of theater in it. There's a little bit of theater. Anne was really very good at this, getting us all involved in it. So theater plays a lot of things, but I think in my work, I'm for some reason, I'm very interested in opera. And I think that's because my fiance, who's with us today, Lisa Lance, is a violinist. And, we used to go to the opera constantly because visually it was just, did you see that? And then she would say, did you hear that? And I'm going, I think we're a duo. I think we are, So that really appealed to me, that sense of that aspect of theater. And opera in particular, because the sound, the music is augmented through a certain level of extravagance. My parting the curtain at Harder Hall on the stage, and this was for a calendar.
Yes.
And said everybody had to come who was, whatever, we were doing ceramics at Alfred Calendar. And I had a round jar, and I just stepped through the curtain and held it. And it was probably, my version of RuPaul's Drag Race or something, I don't know. It was sort of like, I didn't know about RuPaul then, but it was probably that kind of send-up, because ceramics at Alfred was just so important. It was so serious. Like, lighten up, have fun. And this is goofy. There's the new guy at Alfred in the calendar going this way. I don't know. It probably was a really bad idea, John. It probably was a really bad idea.
Because I think it goes with the three things that
Yeah, there's another really interesting, I should leave more room for questions, but I really want to get at this, but there's an interesting tie-in to some things here with the famous, I mentioned it earlier because of France, Wildenhain, but the Bauhaus. So what was true here also was Charles Harder was head of the industrial design department. Val and Bob, and to a degree Ted, studied industrial design, designing for industry. And we know that, Binns came out of that picture because his father was the director of the Worcester Pottery Works, and he knew all of that side of things. And so Charles Harder was spinning this focus on industrial design. And now, I mentioned it's 1973. The other thing about the Bauhaus, this is, yes, design, Walter Gropius, design. It was utopian idealism about design that would change the world, international style architecture, all of this. But the other fascinating thing about the Bauhaus was that Joseph Albers taught there, and Annie Albers, who was a fiber artist, and Joseph Albers, a painter. And in 1933, the Bauhaus closed because of Hitler's rise to power. And so there was this wave of immigration. That's how Franz got here with Marguerite. That's how Lucy Ree wound up in Britain. And Hans Kober wound up in Britain. But when Joseph Albers left, he came and founded Black Mountain College. And who showed up at Black Mountain College in 1953? Peter Voulkos, ceramic artist par excellence, studied in Montana. Francis Sensko was his teacher. He met William de Kooning. He met Merce Cunningham. He met John Cage. He met Robert Turner, who built the Kill at Black Mountain. What's fascinating is that Voulkos realized there was something else going on here. It wasn't about the Bauhaus and the design for industry. It was about painting and sculpture and art. And he became the toast of the town. He changed how we thought about ceramics. But both of those connections are through the lens of the Bauhaus, which is pretty interesting. So when I came here, that history of design was very much embedded. So not only had the Vietnam War thrown a monkey wrench into things, but design still had this hold on. Did Charles Harder forget about art? Did he forget about modern art? There was post-impressionism, there was impressionism, there was Manet, there was, painting of the average scene. This was Manet. A lot of things had gone on in the frame of modernism. And some of these folks went to the Bauhaus to teach painting, etc. Paul Klee taught at the Bauhaus. And Alfred sort of wasn't registering that there was art and that ceramics was art, craft, and design. That's really where my problem comes from, being able to access that, even to today with all of you, the problems that were addressed with the arts and crafts movement. And it wasn't so much get rid of the machine, it was have control over the machine. But there was also a socialist kind of idea that communal work together to make this thing was important, not having the powerful manager, corporate. Yes, okay, we know that. Then, where was Binns? He grew up, he was born in 1857. He grew up within the frame of the reaction to the industrialization of the world. And he grew up in this frame of the arts and crafts movement. And that's why I mentioned the Chinese connection, because of what his work echoed to some degree. But the arts and crafts was a simple form, a kind of sense of no synthetic materials, something about making by hand. And what happened to Art Nouveau? Art Nouveau was an outgrowth of the arts and crafts movement. Think of Morris's wallpaper. And then there was Art Deco. Don Schreckengoss has a cup and saucer in this showcase right here in front. It reeks of Art Deco. That was the 20s and 30s. So what I'm talking about is all of us becoming more familiar with these contextual dimensions, that ceramics doesn't happen, shapes from out of nowhere. Ceramics is a serious, rigorous, intensive study of art making and all these three-dimensional ideas of art, craft, and design, and how we deal with them and how we bring those into the dialogue of talking about work is significant in terms of maturing as an art form. We've never had a mature critical dialogue, really. We had Garth Clark, who's now Glenn Adamson. In the whole world of critique around ceramic art, there are two people, Garth Clark and now Adamson. That's not enough. Painting must have dozens of critics. Designers talk about this stuff all the time, theoretically. There must be a number of people talking about design and theorizing about design. We haven't built, because we don't even teach in this school this art history. You don't have access to it. So you're on your own, but it's important in order to see yourself in this moment as practitioners. We love the ethos of ceramic, the spirit of ceramic. How fascinating it is, how engaging it is. That's the ethos. But the discourse about ceramics is what I'm talking about. How do we engage better and more in depth the discourse that is actually framed around art, craft, and design? That's my lecture. Was that a question? No, I'm sorry.
I have a question for Anne, too.
Yeah, please.
Anne, when you were making things like this, you showed me in your kitchen spinning a tuna can.
What, spinning a what?
Like a tuna can. It's like, John.
Oh, I must have had some wine.
Huh?
I must have been drinking.
Well, it was like
If I was cooking, I was probably having.
You're spinning this tuna can, and it was like, and just watching how this thing here moved around in space was sort of magical. And it's like, Wayne just gave a really nice thing on one thing. You have a really great sense of like how to turn something inside out, how to play with something that you just see. How does that stuff there, you basically inspire you to like that wiggling thing back there? It's like, where do you get that stuff from? And you're just totally aware of things. And it's not something where you need to have a critic tell you what it is. You're just paying attention to what the phenomena of movement might be.
I'm going to answer your question by starting off with something. You're not alone. You are not alone. Ceramics is not alone. When I go in my studio, I'm not alone. I'm not taking what I've read about art theory or what's the latest thing, but I guess I've learned or appreciate using my senses and having a conversation with myself. And I've talked to a couple students. I want to give one anecdote. And it was when I was first going on the professional circuit, so to speak, Anderson Ranch, doing a workshop and giving a presentation. I am going to get to your answer because I think it does have to do with play and whimsy and Victor Bapp just being like, whoa, being amazed. Bill Perry never stopped. How did he say it? Never stop to wonder? Never stop wondering. So you're not alone. And one of the things from teaching that I realized faculty are talking, well, what are your ideas? Well, what's this work about? I don't know. I don't know what it's about. I'm trying to catch that odor in a net. That's why I mentioned that to you. What is it? We know it. When you smell it, you know it, but how do I communicate to you containment? How do I communicate to you the memory of the hand that went across your face? This thing of touch. But this young woman came up to me after I gave this presentation, and she goes, "Your work is so horizontal." Now, how many of you sitting here looking at this, we're cognizant of that this is really horizontal? That could be, that to me is, damn. And I only do this when I get up to do a presentation. I'm the most theatric doing a demo because I can get out of myself. I'm really a very private person. I'm a shy person. But there are moments that you learn that you have to get up. And so she said, "Your work is so horizontal." And I think at the time I was probably 30. I don't know, it was before I came to Alfred, I think. And it's like, I've been making all this stuff, and I never saw that it was horizontal. Where was I? So then I went back to the studio, I was like, I better make stuff that's vertical. I didn't know shit about what was vertical. And then I told myself, maybe I should go back to the horizontal and find out what that's about. Where am I when I'm dealing with the horizontal? That's why I mentioned the thing about where am I when I'm making these pieces and my hand's on the inside. So, I've talked to students like her being once in a grad seminar and all this conceptual stuff coming down about the work and like what it made them feel like and how it made the digressions that it took them. And I just kind of raised my hand. I think students thought I was a pain in the ass. And I said, "What's this made out of?" I said, "Oh, come on." I said, "Well, it's made out." They said, "Well, it's made out of clay." Is there anything? And I said, "What kind of clay?" Well, it was earthenware. Earthenware, you can put your shovel in the ground anywhere on this planet, and you're probably going to hit earthenware clay. It's ubiquitous. And you know who uses pottery or architecture made of earthenware clay? It's not the kings and the princes and the aristocracy. It's the everyday people. So now this material is coded. It goes into, it has a hierarchy. Porcelain. The implications of porcelain. So I'm kind of digressing here, but my point is to pay attention. You have all the information that you need to evolve your notions. I even would say, how do you make your slabs? If you think you need slabs, do you run to the slab roller? Stop. Think about how that clay's coming out of the bag. There becomes a rhythm, a texture develops, evolves. You're in that moment. You're making some decision that you are taking stock, taking inventory of what you're doing, how you're doing it. So, yeah, put that can on a stick. And you know, you don't need a glass of wine. Sometimes you just need to get a new prescription. Literally.
We're at 5:45. Has anybody got a couple?
Speaking of wine,
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's 1 o'clock, everybody. A couple of last questions, maybe slightly
Or observations.
less.
Observations are great. I think they could be triggers.
I just got close and noticed your glaze is so different. Your glaze is grainy.
Like 320 sandpaper, 220 grit sandpaper.
Right.
It was an accident. It was another one. The kiln screwed up a whole 6 months worth of work. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, you know what you say to yourself when you see that stuff come out? Yeah, and I set them all. But I saved a couple little small pieces, kept them on the windowsill. 2 years later, I'm walking by. Damn. Sometimes you don't, so these things about what you might categorize as, I don't like the word failure, because it can be debilitating, but it's a detour. You might not have I didn't get what I wanted, so I got pissed, and I deviated and did whatever I needed to do, but then 2 years later, I saw that surface, and I go, I need that. I didn't go to Alfred. I was at the University of Washington. Patty Warsheen is going down to Dobie Depot and buying Duncan. She's buying all commercial glaze. So I come from a school where you use commercial glazes. So I didn't know how to get this. So I used my own sense of cooking. Well, if this does this, let's try it. So this was an outcome of something, again, like freshman foundation. Well, you don't always get what you want, but sometimes you get something that's a fantastic opportunity. And then you got to figure out how to get it. And the reason I love this glaze is because of the geometry. And it's not intentionally geometry, it's just that's what cones and cylinders are. But with the edginess and the planar element of this, to me it gives this illusion that it's soft. So there's this shroud of kind of like this fog that's become tangible that shrouds it. And then you come up to touch it. You all can touch this one before you leave because it's mine and the museum doesn't take any responsibility for it. So if you want to come touch that one, it's fine with me. But, so I won't touch that one, it's not mine anymore. So it looks soft.
No, oh my goodness, I wanted to touch it earlier, but I didn't.
So, and it is craft, and it's craft that has to be really worked hard at. All this is work. It's just really a lot of work.
And Wayne mentioned something about light. And as we get this incredible sunlight coming into this space now, and we see this piece particularly, I've thought about this in your work as I've spent some time with it. Maybe you can mention does light play a role in your conception of what you're after?
It's, I know my studio, it's totally flooded with its fluorescent lights because I just need to see it. So I don't work with like a light bulb, a light, single light to see it. So I just know that it's integral. I mean, but any sculpture, anything, if you don't have light, you don't have shape, you don't have any, but I do think that it's part of knowing that illusion as to what precedes and what projects. Depending on the light, this could begin, I can't do it because it's too sharp, But actually, this happened in an opening at Helen Dretz. A gentleman came and asked me, "Where's the piece that's on the announcement?" And I said, "What's right here?" The reason he didn't recognize it is that the piece had a tubular shape to it. And the way it had been photographed, the shadow on that tubular shape, he thought it was a recession. So like the young woman who came up to me and said, "Your work is so horizontal." And here this guy shares this. That's why I love these moments where people come up and share an observation that they have. They don't have to ask me a question. Sometimes questions are really hard to come up with. And also, I taught in a program where when I first got here, came to Alfred, everybody, it seemed to me that you were only as smart as the questions that you asked yourself or the questions that you asked. And I thought, I really like Ted Koppel on Nightline, because this guy would offer an observation and then ask his guest to comment on it. So I really think that, everybody has a different lens, and so how you see things and you share with me how you see something is much more of a gift than you asking me a question that I can probably go on a detour. I'm really good at digression.
Well, on that note,
Let's digress and go
I
get
think
something
that
to eat.
maybe we should sort of break things up now and thank our guests. And then if anybody who does want to stick around and continue to have conversation and look at the show, we'll still be open for a little bit longer. And go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. I just wanted to maybe share a little closing remark. Working with Anne is an example of this. John, Andrea, Paul, Linda. Being an Alfred is a privilege. And it's always been a privilege for me to have students who are really serious about what they're doing and are engaged in what they're doing and want that sense of being witnessed and acknowledged, and that's rich. And for someone who is a dedicated educator as much as I am an artist, that is a great privilege that I've always enjoyed by being here and by working with my distinguished colleagues who are, you already know, amazing human beings and artists. So thank you all for being here. You've continued that privilege for all of us.
Thank you for putting up the Legacy in Motion show. This is your last show that you put up, and it's really been nice that you were part of this, and it took a lot of work. Thank you for being part of this.
And thanks to Ben for coming up with this idea, because
Okay,
it's
we're all
fun.
very thankful. Okay.